Hello, it's Tim Harness here. I come from a quiet little town called Horncastle in the middle of Lincolnshire, where nothing much ever happens. The only time it got into the national news was a flood in 1960 when I was 4, so it didn't influence me very much. In 1972, I was 16. I'd only seen one band, the prog rock band Yes, at the Gliderdome in Boston. Then in the spring bank holiday of that year, the Great Western Express Pop Festival, the biggest festival since the Isle of Wight in 1970, came to a field 10 miles from where I live. And I want to tell you the story of that festival. On that spring bank holiday, Lincoln hosted the biggest pop festival since the Isle of Wight a couple of years earlier. Except it wasn't in Lincoln, it was at Bardney. Locals like myself knew that it wasn't at Bardney either, but at Tophome, which was the farm and the ruins of an abbey. For a few days, Tophome was the centre of the rock universe, and I was there. This festival has been largely forgotten about, but at the time it was a big deal, and hosted some of the biggest artists of the 1970s, including The Faces, Rory Gallagher, The Beach Boys, Slade, Joe Cocker, Wishbone Ash, and little-known new bands including Genesis, Status Quo, Roxy Music, and even comedy outfit Monty Python. It really was the business at the time. As well as producing plenty of carrots and spuds, Lincolnshire does have a strong pop music heritage. Bernie Taupin is from Market Raisin, and Rod Temperton, who wrote Thriller, Off the Wall and Boogie Nights, is from Cleethorpes. In January 1972, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Underwood, owner of an estate in the village of Bishopsbourne in Kent, announced that it would be the site for a pop festival to take place over the spring bank holiday of that year. The Great Western Express Festival Company had been created to put on the event with the idea of making loads of money. The two public faces of the company were Lord Harlech and Stanley Baker. Lord Harlech was the former British ambassador in Washington and founder of Harlech Television. Stanley Baker was a well-known actor, most famous for his role in the 1964 film Zulu, where he played Victoria Cross winner John Chard. The people of Bishopsbourne rapidly showed they were very against the idea, so the site migrated 200 miles north. In mid-April, it was announced that the festival would be on a farm in Tophome, in deepest Lincolnshire, 12 miles from Lincoln. But then a High Court order was sought to stop the festival. The action was brought against the festival company and the farmer Bill Hardy by Lindsey County Council, Horncastle Rural District Council and other local landowners. They were all supported by the Attorney General, Sir Peter Rawlinson. Horncastle RDC wanted their public health officer, George Daubney, to rule against the festival on health grounds. But he saw no legal reason to forbid it, which set him against his employers. He was flown down to London by the festival company to testify at the High Court in their defence. Mr. Daubney was fired by the council, but the judge forced them to give him his job back. His career suffered consequently, and he never recovered his senior position. After a 3-week legal battle, permission was given for the festival, but the judge issued an injunction against the festival being held in such a way as to cause a nuisance. The directors of the company had to agree that there must be no trespass, no public nuisance, no noise away from the festival site. The Vicar of Bardney agreed to hold a bond of £10,000 to pay for any damage caused by festival goers. The festival company built a 3-mile-long fence around the site and employed 300 men to stop people from climbing over it. They were led by former Met Police Detective Superintendent Raymond Dagg. A group of Hells Angels were also taken on, who stayed in Tophome Hall. The police had a force of 700 men to stop the wicked hippies from starting a revolution. Thankfully, they stopped Alexander Wakefield from Didsbury with a massive 33 grams of cannabis, for which he received a £150 fine. The roof of the main stage consisted of polythene sheets held up by a 40-foot steel mast, which then collapsed and was replaced by scaffolding. It was all very primitive. The media got very excited about the Great Western Express Festival and probably expected another Isle of Wight. It was covered in both national and local papers. I thought at the time it was a historic occasion and have hung on to my collection of papers for almost 50 years, which shows what a nerd I am. The festival was planned for May the 26th to the 29th, 1972, over the spring bank holiday. I just turned 16 and was very excited about the prospect of so many bands just down the road from Horncastle. Camping wasn't an option because I didn't have a tent or a sleeping bag, and anyway the weather was terrible. Luckily, my friend's dad Ken was able to give us a lift to Tophome in his Hillman Minx and bring us back home to sleep in our own beds. Not very adventurous, but better than sleeping in a cold leaking tent. The price of a ticket for the 4-day festival was just £5, which even then was very good value. At the time, £5 would buy you an album and a pair of loom pants. Today, an album and a pair of cheap jeans would probably cost around £50, but the price for a ticket for a festival is probably around £200, so the festival really was dirt cheap. In the 70s, record companies made their money from album sales, and festivals were a great way to promote their records. The festival was heavily promoted in the music press, in the New Musical Express, Disc and Sounds. I must have forgotten to buy the Melody Maker. The line-up for the festival was very good. There were many acts that faded into obscurity, but many who are still well known today, including The Faces, Rory Gallagher, The Beach Boys, Slade, Joe Cocker and Wishbone Ash. There were many bands on 3 different stages over the 4 days of the festival, which started on Friday evening and continued until Monday evening. On the main stage, which is where I spent most of my time, there were 33 different bands including the headliners. There were another 23 bands in the Giants of Tomorrow tent, but none of them have ever become giants. The only band that became remotely well known was a Welsh heavy metal band called Budgie. There were another 13 acts performing in the folk tent, which is the 1970s version of a chill-out room. I believe the marquee blew down, which is possibly divine intervention. I didn't like folk then, and I don't like folk today, so you can put that in your mandolin and smoke it. The weather was typical of an English May bank holiday. It was terrible with heavy rain and wind. The Lincolnshire Echo described it as a pop swamp, which set the template for many pop festivals in the future. An audience of about 25,000 showed up for Saturday, which would have disappointed the organisers. The rain and high winds were battering the stage at times, and the opening band struggled to get through to the wet audience, huddling in their plastic wraps. At the time, the only place you could see pop music on TV was Top of the Pops. The whistle test had only just started, and it was on BBC Two, so its audience was very small, and I didn't watch it. So if bands hadn't been on Top of the Pops, I'd never seen them, so that was most of the bands at the pop festival. I didn't arrive until Saturday, but I heard that Rory Gallagher was very good on Friday night. On Saturday, Roxy Music played their first ever festival gig. Nobody took much notice of them at the time. It was several months before Virginia Plain came out, but the photos show that they look very cool, especially Andy Mackay in his green satin jacket. Stone the Crows were received with great applause by the audience. Their guitarist Les Harvey had been electrocuted on stage a few weeks earlier in Swansea. The replacement guitarist was supposed to be Peter Green from Fleetwood Mac, but he pulled out. His replacement at 2 days' notice was Steve Howe from the aforementioned Yes, who stepped in and did a great job. Top of the bill on Saturday night was Rod Stewart and the Faces. They were a bit pissed and ramshackle, but they played all their hits and put on a very good show. On Sunday, the Newcastle band Lindisfarne got a huge reception, with lots of Geordies travelling south for the gig. They had already had a massive hit with the album Fog on the Tyne and were a very popular act. My favourite band of the whole festival was Slade. They had loads of pop hits and were also a great rocking live band. In an age of long, dull prog rock songs, sorry Genesis, they showed the other bands how to be entertainers. After Slade, the Monty Python comedy team came on. I remember them doing the classic parrot sketch, but the sound was terrible and there was lots of people shouting, "Turn it up!" Top of the bill on that day were the Beach Boys, who'd come all the way from Southern California to soggy Bardney. They were in their shaggy hair and beards phase at the time. But their surf music went down really well and they got the audience sing along with all their many hits. I don't remember many of the bands which were on Monday. I was probably huddling in my disposable paper sleeping bag that I bought for 50p. Basically, it was a big potato sack lined with polystyrene, but it kept the wind out. Between the bands, you could wander between the stalls selling food, jeans and cheesecloth shirts and read the handwritten signs which were the only way to find friends. It was the days before the huge flags that help you find people at festivals today. The popular fashions of the day for young gentlemen at Bardney were old military greatcoats, school blazers for the public school boys and combat jackets. I had a combat jacket and a bush hat from an army surplus store in Lincoln. My second favourite band of the festival was Sha Na Na, an energetic 50s pastiche rock and roll band from New York. They had quiffs, leather jackets and drainpipe jeans long before Grease made them popular. They were brilliant fun and put on a great show, singing loads of great songs including Yakety Yak, Jailhouse Rock, Rock and Roll Is Here to Stay and Heartbreak Hotel. They were so popular they had to do 3 encores. The final performance was from Joe Cocker, who was totally stoned and just kept fiddling with his long hair all the time. He had to be supported by one of the backup singers in between each song, but he did sing perfectly. But after the energy of Sha Na Na, he was a bit of a letdown. On Tuesday the 30th of May, the festival visitors drove home or took a Hudson's bus to Lincoln to get the train. They were helped on the bus by the police, who I'm sure were very grateful for the overtime payments on the bank holiday. The Great Western Express no doubt lost lots of money for its backers, and it has never established itself in the public memory like the Isle of Wight or the many Glastonbury festivals. But for the school kids from Lincolnshire, it was a memorable few days when we were able to be part of the great rock and roll society.